Okay, so I've spent a lot of my life in sales, so I look at this and I like this idea, cathedral in the bazaar. It's like, what do you say? The hat seller gets together with the spice seller, and they all sort of pitch their wares together, and they say, "Hey, buy the hats and the spices and the whatever, and we'll give you a deal." And it's like it's a very cute story, but that sounds like a sales nightmare. Let's say if I'm a buyer, so one of the things that I think I challenged you on early on when we talked about this is, I look at this list map that we've got up on the screen. What is this? CFTPS. So that's the acronym of the five vendors here, and say, okay, great. Maybe I want to buy that stack, right? It could be that stack. It could be, I'll pull up another one. Let's say this one, or could be this other one with four vendors in it. If a buyer wants to buy that, how do they do that? Because that seems very complicated.
I'm not going to lie that it's not complicated, and it's something where I'm actually seeing both from the IS standpoint and from internal from the Pachyderm standpoint, where we've gone to Pachyderm's very much embraced the IA concept, and or else I wouldn't be working on it as much, and they've been very supportive of the idea. And when I look at it, we've gone to market with a number of different vendors, sometimes with two, sometimes with three,
Okay.
and like you have a number of different sales teams in the pitch, and you all have to learn how to kind of synchronize and work together on those things. And
Sounds
sometimes there's
complicated.
different. Yeah, it's complicated. I don't know that it's any more complicated than kind of any enterprise sale, though. Right?
Yeah.
It's like, right, when you really look at like the big vendor buying stuff, right? All of these things are kind of complicated, right? It's not, and the complication may be in the fact that you got to go count seats and talk to the compliance and legal team and talk to 50 other salespeople and solution architects, and you got to do a POC, and you got to go through, right? And so there's a huge chunk just to buy one piece of software, and
Yeah.
then when you look at something like this, like some of the complexity is in talking to a number of different vendors. So that is one of the things we hope to address with the IO over the coming years. You and I have talked about that, right? We've started talking about with some of the some bigger providers about being able to provide a lab, right, for being able to spin up a few of these different things. So going from the
Right.
blueprint to click three of these things as a sandbox, right? And then maybe they don't work perfectly, but you get a chance to test across things and play with them, and that's great.
Right.
And we've started to talk about things like the Combinator project, which we want to bring in, where that it has from a few folks who've been doing some great work with these Terraform in the back to kind of standardize deployment of some of these things, right? So there has to be there's
So,
kind of
so
crawl,
the
walk,
goal
run.
of that would be sort of one-click deployment of a multi-vendor stack. Is that right?
Right, exactly, right. And then maybe in the beginning days you're only talking about a POC level, deployment of those kinds of things, right? But then you get to something where maybe the providers go, hey, this is it becomes they become beholden to it, and they go, this is a great idea. No, well, now I want to make sure that it deploys on, AWS Azure with like redundancy and backup and these other
Right.
and two different geos or whatever. And so I want to define a complex one, and then I want to hand that back to I want to hand that back to Terraform, I want to hand that back to Combinator, or I want to keep that as, okay, I'm working with these 3 or 4 partners. We've all developed this privately. And as part of the enterprise deployment solution, we share that Terraform. You use this project and it develops. So I think there's like a lot of ways that we can kind of help, solve this problem for folks over the coming years. And that's part of the IA itself has to evolve over time
Right.
as we solve one problem in the space. I solved the problem of kind of bringing clarity. We solved the problem of bringing clarity with kind of the blueprint stack, and then after that, you start to say, okay, we create papers on what does the landscape look like? What does AI readiness look like? What does it mean build versus buy versus just buying a set solution? What is it good for? I was talking to a vendor today that said, a solution integrator today that said, what would, if I were trying to do the satellite imagery and or I was just trying to do churn prediction, what kind of stacks would I build? Like
Right.
case-based
Right. Right.
scenarios of
Yeah.
these kinds of what piece would I,
What
so you
problems
start
you're
to
trying to
solve.
solve, and therefore which stacks are probably the most appropriate.
Exactly. So you start solving it from an education standpoint, then you start solving it at the simple level, at the POC level, right? Hey, after 3 or 4 deals like this start to get done this way, well, now you've got kind of a more standard process. Maybe you start to unify your paper. Maybe you start to make it easier, right?
And that
And
was
and,
kind of
and
a follow-on question. It's like, whose paper
right.
is this on? I don't know. Which of the
Yeah.
five vendors am I going to pay, or do we have to set up, contract and procurement, because that's a nightmare. Set up procurement arrangements with 5 vendors now. Is that really how this is going to go down? Because a lot of buyers would
Look,
just reject that probably.
I mean, some of it you're going to have an individual software relationship in the same way you've got an individual software relationship with a lot of different vendors now, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
don't, when you buy your logging platform, you don't also buy your mail platform from the logging platform, right? You have, and so you have different support systems for those. So
Yeah.
that's going to be the case. But
That's true.
I have no doubt that there's going to be solutions integrators that come along and start to specialize in 2 or 3 of these stacks. In fact, I've already had a number of inquiries from people going like, okay, well, which ones do you want me to build? Which one should I focus on? Right
Right,
now,
right.
and the I have to take kind of a,
Wearing your Aya hat, you have to be
yeah,
neutral.
I have to be neutral on
Yeah,
these
of
things,
course.
but at the same time, like you can start to say, well, look, here's a bespoke solution for the problem you're trying to figure out. Like if you took these three or four vendors, right, or and you built an MVP with this, right, and so a number of folks are kind of working on that, on the back end, and then
Okay.
all of a sudden those become more kind of integrated over time, and then maybe that becomes the one throat to choke, right? That's the phrase they always use in the enterprise, right?
Right, of
That
course.
in the
The
same way that
integrator
like
becomes the one throat
yeah,
to choke in that case.
right, and like and then until eventually, the unified single purpose DOS Uber system comes along 10 years from now and puts the integrator out of business, or then spawns new integrators, right? That
Right.
come along just trying to manage that crazy ass software that's been developed over that period of time, right?
Right. Okay.
So
So
again, evolution in that space too.
all right, so this is so essentially what you've done is you pulled together. I mean, I can't believe how fast you've pulled together that list of partners. It's grown significantly since you and I last talked, but whatever, 50, 60, 70 companies, whatever are in there, including the system integrator folks. And at this point, you've got whatever, let's call it 50 components. Let's just call them component manufacturers. And you think that you could kind of assemble 3 to 5 of those to build a stack to solve some problem. So then a buyer could then come and kind of get to know the AI Infrastructure Alliance, AIA. They could get to know all the folks in there. They could hopefully at some point say, oh, well, I am trying to solve these kinds of problems. And maybe there's some kind of educational framework in there that says, oh, if you're doing image or you're doing natural language, you're doing this thing at this scale, probably these are some reference stacks that might make sense. Ideally, perfect world, if you could wave a magic wand, they would have a place, they'd be able to click a button. No different than you started with the WordPress example. You can go to 100 sites now and say, I would like to set up a WordPress site. And it goes click and it provisions the servers and the storage and the Linux and the Apache and the MySQL and the PHP and the WordPress and the themes. Like it assembles that whole stack in 10, 15 seconds, spins it up and says, ta-da, here's your login. And it's ready to go. With a single vendor like a SageMaker and Azure, a Google, or even some of the data robots or the data IQs of the world, they have cloud infrastructure ready to go. They have sandboxes that you can try. You can literally just log in, set up an account, and start working on. This isn't there yet, it sounds like, but it sounds like you want to get there.
Yeah, it's not there yet, and I like to be 100% transparent of where we're at, right? And again, where I tend to find we are going to get there, and that's part of the reason of turning it into a full nonprofit and taking in, some funding from members and getting us to a point where we can help build out these things, because you can't do that with volunteers, right?
Right.
There are limits in terms of like what things you can do with volunteerism. It's you can volunteer to be on the events committee as a volunteer, but somebody's got to be the project manager, somebody's got to organize the software, somebody's got to make sure everybody shows up and has good lighting and like it gets there at the right time and sends out the invites. And
It's not a real, it's not really going to happen, right, unless it's funded.
Right, and so these kinds of things though, but we're confident in the funding, we're excited about it, and we're confident in those next stages. So we're going to work through those bits to kind of get to that phase. In the meantime, the main thing that I say is the mass majority of people are finding the different companies in the eye is because they've looked around and there's other solutions out there don't actually solve that problem, right? And when I look at something like Pachyderm, we're about to do a huge push on kind of the unstructured side of the house, because I started looking around at all of our customers, and I realized like a huge chunk of them are doing it, right? Are doing unstructured workloads, right? Okay. Video and audio and genomics.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, why is that? I mean, like, why did we win out against other companies in that case? And it's like, well, because generally our software is one of the few that really worked really well with that unstructured data. Right. And so whether, there's a company, we got a case study now coming out of Woven Planet that's doing high resolution satellite imagery, right? It's like each image is like a gig to 300 gigs, and they've carved it up into little chunks, and they're running 30 different pipelines to like do object recognition in one, and then you knit them all back together. Right. So it's an amazing use case, and it's just not something you can do with kind of the tools that were built for housing prices prediction and churn prediction and log analysis, right? And
you're not going to throw that into a data robot, for example, and not to pick on data robot. It's a great platform.
Yeah, exactly, and that they're able to do wonderful things with it, and if you're able to do some of the things in one of these kind of singular platforms, great. But what we tend to find is like there's another one that and another company, for instance, is doing video analysis, and they have a bunch of different algorithms. Like, where do we insert the ads in a video? Well, it's got 4 different machine learning pipelines running, and they're going, okay, well, we've got to have a dialogue detector, and the dialogue detector has to say, okay, why do you need a dialogue detector? Well, because you don't want to insert an ad right in the middle of like, what I'm saying, right? You want to like finish what I'm saying. And then put the ad in there, right? So you want to do that, and then selecting the correct thumbnail, right, is something that, like, which presenting to the user after they've uploaded a video, which thumbnail to pick. The machine learning algorithm selects the right thumbnail with like a huge uptick in clickability, right, based on this being done sort of like randomly before, or just kind of picking like a couple of keyframes from the beginning or the end. Those usually aren't the best ones, and all of a sudden now you've got maybe the only thing that anybody ever sees of that video is that one thumbnail, right? So the machine learning algorithm that's optimized for that, that's just a problem you're not going to solve with kind of the traditional software out there. So people tend to find this. Another company, for instance, we're finding the financial companies, was just talking to Y Data doing a POC. They're specialized in synthetic data. They just got an infusion of capital. Generating effective synthetic data, right? When you cannot necessarily go out and grab all of the data, that's a huge problem, right? It sometimes financial data, you might not have the rights to use it, or you look at the kind of scandal with the health data that's happened, right? But in the past, when they've tried to generate synthetic data, right, for some of those things, it hasn't worked, right? You look at some of the early IBM Watson failures in IBM Watson Health, where they shuttered it. They tried to generate synthetic data, and it wasn't good. So these companies now that are coming along, generating realistic synthetic data to augmented data sets, huge new problem. Again, you're not going to get that from just kind of a quote unquote end-to-end solution, because that might not be the problem that they're set up to solve. They're solving more generic problems that have kind of already been kind of baked, or more baked than someone who's going to go do cutting edge trading algorithms, or needing to do fraud detection and need to generate a bunch. So you're going to need a bespoke tool, and there's going to be no getting around that for a period of time. You're either going to need to build that in house, or you're going to need to get that bespoke tool and integrate it into what you're doing. And that's really just going to be the state of the art for the next couple of years, no matter what anybody's marketing literature says.
That makes a ton of sense, and that's actually probably the best explanation I've heard so far about the fork in the road that buyers have to take. Because that challenge, and that I've looked at a lot of these systems and a lot of these companies and vendors and platforms and products. The challenge is right now, it's very noisy, it's very confusing. All the marketers are saying exactly the same thing. We are an end-to-end system that does everything, solves all problems for all use cases for all customers. They all say the same thing. And there are a good 100 of them out that, beyond what you have in IAD, there are another, 40, 50, 60 that are out there saying the same thing. And when I dig in and when I meet with them and I have these conversations with them, I'm like, you do 3 of the 40 things that you need. You're not end-to-end. And so, we have these conversations, and it's very tough. But I think that the bigger fork in the road is this, back to the beginning of the conversation. Do I just pick one vendor that kind of says they mostly do everything? Or do I sort of go down the track of really being more selective and curating my own stack? And that takes a level of maturity, right? To know you can't dive into that unless you know what the heck you're doing and you know how to build the car and you know what the enterprise architecture looks like. So you have to have a team who's capable of having that conversation, making smart trade-offs, picking the right partners, kind of future-proofing their own enterprise architecture, and then being prepared to say, well, that component's not working, we're going to swap that out, we're going to put this other one in, and being able to have that level of enterprise architecture around a system that's still being built and still being invented, frankly.
That's right. If you're trying to revolutionize your business model, there's 2 kind of levels of machine learning. One is where you're just kind of integrating some basic design patterns that have already worked, right? If you want to do
what everybody else has been doing.
Yeah, if you want to do some sentiment analysis in order to to route some of your calls to figure out who's the angriest and who needs to triage right away, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's some stuff for that. If you want to be able to detect, transcription from audio, right? There's design patterns for that, right? And maybe you just
more than design patterns, there are off-the-shelf components and or services that just do it.
Exactly. So design patterns and components that do it, and you don't need to reinvent the wheel in these things, but there's a huge chunk of places where you are inventing the wheel, And those are the places where people are really trying to develop a brand new revolutionary business model. I just saw one that was on LinkedIn the other day. I thought it was fantastic, where they were generating models for kind of catalogs. And when we look at catalogs, like we tend to think like there's a photo shoot. Well, yeah, there's a photo shoot of one kind of like, the hero shot, they call it, of like one of the top, models for like 3 or 4 different ads. But then there's all the 3,000 bits of clothes in the catalog that you can only take so many pictures of those things.
Yeah.
You can only take them with so many types of models.
Yeah.
So what you do is you hire a range of models, maybe of different shapes and sizes, different colors, different ethnicities, right? But you really aren't going to be able to photograph all of your clothes in that. And then you don't really have any way to know, as the person who's doing the shopping, is this going to fit right on me? Well, now all of a sudden, with this is a revolutionary model to say we can, pardon the pun, we can generate, models in any shape and size, and you'll be able to show all of your clothes on that, and they'll look photorealistic. This is a game. This is a revolutionary business model. You don't build something like first of all, it takes an insight to come up with that business model, the revolutionary business model, and then you're not going to be able to go just grab off the shelf components and buy the O'Reilly book that says how do I generate synthetic models for catalogs, right?
Right.
You just invented things. So you're really going to need to go find and build a number of different pieces, and that's really where the cutting edge is. And I think EIA companies really represent a lot of these cutting edge stacks, right? If you look, there's no reason that Vertex and SageMaker and Databricks and things like that are not going to solve churn prediction and log analysis and anomaly detection on a few different things. Like these are there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. But if you're looking at a revolutionary business model and you're looking at a vendor who's on the cutting edge trying to do something that's never been done in history, then you're going to need one of these bespoke vendors, or 2 or 3 of them, and you're going to have to figure out a way to integrate them. You're going to need a solutions integrator like yourself, and you're going to need to be able to write some of your own code, and you're going to need to realize that that's going to be the state of the art for a period of time, because you are doing the state of the art.
Got it. Excellent. Dan, this went longer than I intended, but I'm glad that we got to dig through all those different things. Where can people, I've got a couple of links that I was thinking of putting up on the screen. I was thinking of your Medium address, your medium.com/. Is that kind of the best place to find your reading, or is it Hacker Noon? And we can always throw stuff into the show notes.
Yeah, I mean, I've written a lot of stuff for Hacker. Yeah, I've written a lot of stuff for Hacker Noon. I would say, Twitter is Dan_Jeffries, the number 1. Don't just do Dan Jeffries.
_Jeffries.
Number 1. See if you pull that one up. I think there. You get it. Otherwise, I think the other Dan Jeffries studies the asexual reproduction of tree frogs. So,
I wouldn't put it past you. I'm sure you've probably written a few reports on that, actually.
I've done a little bit of research, but that fellow's done a lot more. So I've been dabbling in the asexual reproduction of tree frogs.
Let me see if this banner works.
AI-infrastructure.org is correct. The Twitter handle's there, and then the Medium one that you wanted to get in is just Medium. It's just and then /Dan.Jeffries. And really, if you Google Dan Jeffries in Medium, you'll also get that. Luckily, Google has been indexing me for years. So
I'm always tempted to just use a "Let me Google that for you" link and just put "Let me Google that for you" and then Dan Jeffries. There you go. Here are all the links. But I'll put all those in the show notes. Awesome. Thank you. I cannot express my appreciation enough. It's been really great to chat with you about this stuff. This is more of a follow-on to the conversation we had, but I'm glad we were able to have this one more in public. I want to be able to share this more widely, because I think that the work you guys are doing in IA is super exciting, really crazy, very chaotic, very Darwinian. I've never seen anything like it before. I think a lot of other people will say they've never seen anything like it. So it's super cool what's going on over there. I think more people need to know about it. So thanks for making time today.
I really appreciate you having me on. It was a fantastic conversation. We got to dig into a whole bunch of wonderful stuff. So
absolutely. Like I said before the podcast, we could probably do a whole series of these, but this will have to do for now. This will be the start.
Awesome.
Thanks for being on, Dan. Appreciate it. And hopefully catch you on a future episode.